great pleasure to be here. I don't think I'd have actually ended up in Scandinavia if it wasn't for Scotland. I studied here, I met my partner, and we ended up, she was from Sweden, we ended up there. So if it wasn't for Glasgow, I wouldn't have been there. So there's a big connection, well, for me at least, there's a big connection between Lulea and Glasgow. So I'm going to speak a little bit first about the city of Lulea. Has anybody here heard of Lulea? Yep, oh, excellent. One person. Oh, two, actually, Pauline in the back there has actually visited my mother-in-law in Lulea. So she has been to Lulea. She stayed in my mum's house. It's a little bit out of the normal for Sweden. It's, obviously, if we look at the map there, we've got little old UK and Scotland and Ireland and the Scandinavian Nordic countries going up north. But most people, when they think about Sweden, or when they think about Norway and they think about Finland, are primarily thinking about the south of Sweden, the Stockholms, the Malmös, those settlements. Whereas actually, if we were to take, it's probably a little bit hard to see on this map, but if we were to take Stockholm and actually drew a line across to Edinburgh and then drew a radius around, the distance between Edinburgh and Stockholm west is about the same distance between Stockholm and Luleå north. So it's a lot further north than a lot of people would want to venture. It's an hour's drive south of the Arctic Circle, and it does get between -30 and +30. The school was actually only closed down at -30, so the kids still go to school until it's -30. Work continues as normal. It's very much set up for that climate, as you can imagine. And so after living there for a few years, I've discovered that there's some really important things. A great coat, 2 pairs of trousers, excellent boots, and the variety pack. It was suggested I should dress up because I actually just came in yesterday in this outfit, but it's a bit too scary. I look like a bit of a monster. So, but I can do it later for personal requests if anybody wants. So I just want to give that brief introduction. So this is the city. It's a beautiful place in the summer. It's on an archipelago, surrounded by water. You can't go very far without coming across water, to be honest. And unfortunately, that map's not very clear. But effectively, it's a city of islands, for want of a better word, and the water flows through the city. So you have a southern harbour, you have a northern harbour. When you go up to the university, it's on the waterfront. When you go to the residential neighbourhoods, you have very easy and strong access to the water. Now, this is a great asset in many different ways. In the summer, as you can imagine, shipping. The big industry in Luleå is iron ore, and the mining of iron ore further north into the Arctic and its movement around the world from the port of Luleå. However, in the winter, the sea freezes, and so the sea becomes a completely different form of transportation or connectivity network. Roads are actually ploughed out on the ice so you can drive to the islands. People, instead of walking across the bridges to get into the city centre, just walk across the sea. People would go out and have a little snack on the sea. They'd walk out to a summer house or something like that. So it becomes a whole different sort of series of connectivities during the summer to the winter. The winter environment is completely different, and the relationships in this place work completely differently. It's also very heavily based around technology. It has huge amounts of security in terms of IT. It has the most amazing connections in terms of Wi-Fi. It has the most amazing connections in terms of district heating systems. And when I say district heating systems, I will put this in context. The town has 80,000 residents, and the biggest industry is SSAB, which process the steel. And the waste heat from that steel production heats all of the houses in all of those settlements. And it actually gets pumped around the whole of the city. And you've got continuous hot water. So the amount of resources that are just coming off one type of industry up there is phenomenal. These are our friends in winter. These are the ones that keep the communication going. They've got different female names, the icebreakers for the city. So this is the Swedish fleet of icebreakers to keep the sea routes for transportation moving, to keep the steel and the iron ore going out of the city. So what I've been looking at for the last couple of years is what are the design dimensions of designing between -30, a place that can hit -30 on a regular basis, if it goes from there within 12 months to +30. So you've got this change over one 12-month period, of one point being way below freezing, where your eyeballs are likely to feel like they're freezing, to being very warm, you can swim in the sea, and you can go and enjoy the beaches and have a barbecue. So a complete contrast over that 12-month period. And with that comes a complete contrast in terms of the light. So in the depths of winter, there is no light, or a couple of hours a day. In the height of summer, the sun goes down for about 20 minutes a day for about 8 weeks, 10 weeks. So very, very, very interesting. So very, very diverse in terms of its weather. And this is before we even get to think about the ideas of sustainability. But for me, this had a sort of like almost a religious moment, because I've been working in practice. I've worked as an urban designer in Scotland for many years. And I suddenly realized that I'd never really thought that much about the climate and actually how we can use places and spaces to actually make our streets, our town centres, our whatever parts of the urban realm more successful by using design to actually improve the microclimate, the sense of comfort, and the sense of welcoming people get from being in those places. So this became a sort of very big interest for me, and luckily it was also the interest of the group that I work in at the university. It's the group of Architecture and Water. Now, it's a diverse range of activities they undertake. I'm very much interested in this idea, design for the winter city. However, within our group, we test boots for manufacturers to see how they actually perform in icy conditions. We test military bridges for the army to see how temporary bridges are going to be, what loading they'll take before they actually get destroyed. Concrete testing for different industries as well. So there's a lot of practical work that we do with different organisations to try and take this research forwards. So that's me in a silhouette, dressed up in my Yoda outfit in winter, going back from the office in the snow. So you kind of do, it's amazing. We forget the difficulties of socialising in these kind of climates in winter, because it's really quite interesting. You can't tell who somebody else is, because they all look the same. You've all got big hats on, you've got maybe goggles, and so it's really hard to recognise people. However, on the opposite side of things, this is my sport of sea kayaking now in the summer. So from the winter to the summer, complete flip side. This was a photograph I actually took about this time last year in a small settlement a little bit further north than Lulea. This is Gällivare. And the Swedes have the best toys in terms of snow clearance. They can get your roads and your infrastructure moving within minutes. It's like this amazing array of machinery that comes out. It's almost like ants running through the streets and clearing it. But so to have a situation like this first thing in the morning, that means that probably came overnight. And you might notice, it's a bit hard to see, there's little poles in front of all the cars. You've got to remember to plug your car in, otherwise the engine freezes. So it's kind of things to remember. Typical residential area in the winter. The sort of build-up of snow you get in residential streets. The back door becomes less usable when the snow gets much higher than that. And so the contrast in winter, the frozen sea. This is at the end of the season. But generally, when you're flying into Lulea, for the last 10 minutes of the flight, you can see the roads ploughed out on the ice. You've got an idea of sort of how far you can actually communicate and move between places within the country at that point of the year. In the summer, amazing landscape, beautiful, beautiful place. A typical street, the same street at the same time of year, and so on and so forth. So we have these great contrasts here. And one of the things is that we're trying to work out and work with how we use those contrasts, how we can actually use these as making things that are special. They relate to the city, they relate to the climate, they relate to what Lulea is, or Norrbotten. Because interestingly, this part of the country was studying or keeping a close eye of what was happening in Scotland a few months ago. Because not unlike the referendum here, this part of the country, Västerbotten and Norrbotten, sees itself as being completely different and not having really any connection with the south of Sweden. So it's been talking about, well, why don't we actually sort of take our own independence? Because we're not the same as the south of Sweden. We have very different industries, we have very different lifestyles, we have very different types of cities, we have very different types of settlements, and they work in very different economies. So we don't have that relationship, and maybe we have stronger relationships actually with the similar towns in Norway or the similar towns in Finland. So this is the Ice Hotel. Anybody seen the Ice Hotel? Gone to the Ice Hotel? You've been to the Ice Hotel. Did you stay overnight? You did. You're a brave man. You're a brave man. Well, I went there and there was a Japanese artist had been doing one of the designs. It was like this dragon, this bed. It was like a broken ship with ice rocks at the end and this sort of dragon leaping over you. And I just thought in the middle of the night, that is not for me. Not for me. No matter how many vodkas you drink before you go to bed. That is not for, you know the place well. So you've been Kirilla, Lulea, Gelavari? Yep. Don't ask difficult questions then. It's an amazing place though, I think. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And this is the summer version that's slightly less well known at the moment, but it's the Tree House or the Tree Hotel. And this is about an hour's drive north out of Lulea. And basically there's all of these different designs for hotel rooms within tree houses. And they're all different designs and people go there and they stay there for a couple of nights. It's a theme thing, I admit, but it's showing that, little interventions that work with the winter, with the summer, and using the materials from those areas. And we play with this quite a lot in terms of the university. So say, for example, this is a few of the students actually testing out how to make an igloo. And the reason they're testing it out at the university is because they're going to go and live in an igloo for a couple of days. So I think they want to make sure they can get it right before they go any further. But after Christmas, we're getting our first ice lecture theatre and our first ice gathering space out in the university campus. So there will be actually a lecture theatre that's actually constructed purely out of ice. So it'll be interesting to see what that feels like to be presenting in. Never know what the acoustics are going to be doing, but it was very interesting. And as part of that process, we often find that there's a benefit in actually working with the materials that are around the place, the snow and the ice. So they're used by the design school to actually look at things in terms of sculpting the ice into different forms, whatever the students fancy. So just some examples. I don't know what this person was thinking when they did a gun, but obviously they maybe didn't. Luckily, it wasn't directly outside of my office, but if it was, I would have taken offence. And on the summer, and painting and decorating. But what does this all mean? Firstly, it means it's very interesting. I think it's very interesting. But secondly, I think there's lots of lessons that we can learn, whether we're in temperate climates, subarctic climates, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that's to do with working with the environment, so the light, the weather, the snow, etc. And one of the projects that the university, or the type of projects the university have been very much involved in over the last years, is looking at the movement and relocation of certain towns in the north of Sweden. As you can see on the map here, you've got Luleå to the south, and then you've got up further, you've got a place called Manberget, which is just next to Gällivare, and a place called Kiruna. And it's very interesting communities there because the main economy at that part of the country is iron ore. And the communities that are built up around these iron ore works have been predominantly related to that industrial activity. Somebody mentioned when I was speaking to them earlier today, there's probably not much other reason for being up there, and maybe that's the case. But every so often, or continuously, obviously the mining companies are continuing to mine. And so in a place like Gällivare, you've got a series of mines that have been developed or mined over the years, which is slowly encroaching into the town. So this is actually Manberget. Sorry, I said it the wrong way around. And this illustration gives you a slight indication of what that means. So this is an illustration just looking down on the open mine that's coming forward through Manberget. So if you can see up there, there's sort of like a big sort of grey spot where there's no trees. That's actually a open mine. You can see it coming through at the top right into the centre. And one of the things that the city planners there are struggling with is, one thing is that you've got a town that's on the move to a certain degree. You've got a situation where the primary economic driver for the city is the mining industry, and it's often going to affect the settlement that's there. So as you can see here, once upon a time, there used to be a grid of streets and spaces and places going across this little area here. And now the mine is actually going straight through, and it's removing those. Sequentially, the streets are disappearing, or the important streets are moving down, and some places are being removed and changed. And in the case of Mambrayet, the majority of those functions are going to be relocated into the settlement adjacent, Jelavari. So there's lots of issues that they're discussing there in terms of, well, how do we actually design successfully the environment? But also other issues of how do we deal with issues of social history? You know, if a place disappears, what happens to the collective memory of those places? Somebody mentioned about, you know, it's not just the retail of a place, but it's about generations of people being there. What happens if those generations have gone? Also, are there important civic or architectural features? Are they to be retained or are they to be moved? And so this is an ongoing process in Sweden. And it's not just this one town. This is a place called Kiruna. And in a similar way, to a certain degree, there's been proposals, I suppose, for nearly 15 years now, for the removal of the town, to actually sort of move the town centre. So there's been a huge investment by LKAB, the mining company, to actually come up with a mechanism of almost, at one point, they were looking at picking the city up and moving it. Not quite as blatantly obvious as that, but actually moving the entire city and the population. And that brought up lots of questions in terms of designing with the environment, designing with the people, but also, do you keep buildings? Is it practically feasible to move buildings? Which buildings would you want to keep? Which ones have the social priorities? Which ones are the ones that are important for that place? So it brought up a lot of debates that weren't just about the industry that were there, but they're also about the social, cultural, retail, etc., history of this place itself. And so in the last few years, as you can see, this is the mine over on the left-hand side, and this is the master plan for the city. The mine is going left to right. And so as the mine is going left to right, the areas of housing are being moved and relocated. So there's been lots of work in terms of the city looking at a new master plan. What types of spaces would we be looking for? What types of areas work well in this type of environment? What kind of places can be successful in a high range of temperatures? And what are the solutions? And this is the town hall there. And can this be moved? Is it physically possible to move it? Is it not physically possible to move it? And so these sort of very big questions, I think it creates so many big questions. What do you do if you're trying to think about moving a town? What are the implications? Led to a whole series of other research propositions coming forwards. And I just want to talk about three of them in a second, very briefly. And this is just a photograph just to prove this is not an unusual thing in Sweden. This is a town that actually just disappeared. And all that's left is the roads and the town signs. And they're maintained by a local trust, just to keep some semblance of the heritage. So it's not unusual that towns can be moved there. So moving on quickly, because I know that we only got a couple more minutes before we go, it's led into three sort of primary research areas that we've been looking at, which I think have an influence or have possibilities, not just in Scandinavia, but in much wider contexts. One is, what are the types of places and the urban morphologies that actually help us use the built environment and the natural environment to create places that are actually more climatically comfortable for people, rather than just sort of thinking about design as being a sort of, let's just drop a grid on this, or just do this, or just copy something from Barcelona, or copy something from London. What are the development patterns and forms that work within that place? And I think now more and more that all places have sort of certain characteristics that will influence the design of our towns and our cities and our high streets and our villages and so on and so forth, relating to climate. And we do not do enough of that thinking half the time when we're master planning places. So that is one sort of big thought that I think is important. And we've been exploring that through various different mechanisms of using computer models to test design proposals that are coming forward, physical models, looking at how snow works, how light works, how the rain works, etc. And coming up with new ways of actually looking at diagramming and actually illustrating the city within those different contexts. Because often when we think about the traditional mechanisms for analysing places, we have traditional tools that are based just on the summer. What about what the place is like during the winter? So that's one dimension. The other dimension that is really the sort of hot topic of debate that's been emerging in a lot of people's work is what is attractive? The Swedes discuss attractiveness on a regular basis. And you find that working with people from different places and different continents, the word attractive in itself means something different to different people. Different countries, different words, different spellings, it's got similar bases. But in Sweden, they're trying to look at what are the things that are attractors to people. And it's not just about the physical beauty or the aesthetic. And it's more about all the things that come together as a package to make a place. Maybe that is the town centre, the health offer, the schooling offer, the public transport offer, the internet offer, whatever it is, but how this comes together to form an attractive package. And for these communities, it's often to do with maintaining and retaining workforces and making sure that people actually live in those areas rather than just flying in and flying out. But lastly, and the one I want to focus on most, is that has led to a very big emerging agenda that puts those two things together, urban morphology and attractiveness of place, in terms of what we've been terming it as health on thin ice. Looking at actually the health dimension of urban design. Now, somebody said something about statistics being complete lies earlier, and so I thought I'd just make up a statistic, just as a complete lie. It's 97%. And so it's got no statistical basis whatsoever. But it's quite fascinating that a lot of the students that we have, a lot of the, they're architecture students, and urban design students, they're all in their sort of early 20s. You see this sort of very high levels of allergies that you would never see elsewhere. You see high levels of certain conditions that you ask yourself the question, why in this country that seems to have such pure air and has quite a lot of health issues? And one of the debates that's coming forward has been, is it about the fact that people are spending so much time indoors and actually overprotected from the natural environment and not exposed to their place? And there's a chap in Canada who really looked at this idea of, should we overprotect people from nature in these communities, i.e. just put everybody in glass boxes so we continuously live indoors? Or do we benefit from exposure? Are there health benefits, mental health benefits, social benefits, and so on and so forth? So what we've been looking at is how we can work with local communities to look at what are the drivers that will make people actually use the outdoor spaces more. What are the things that actually in the winter prevent people from using bicycles, using softer modes of transport like bicycles and kicks and so on and so forth? And how can we actually start to think about creating design solutions that actually make it better for them or easier for them to be outdoors and using those spaces? Now, I can honestly say that I don't think at minus 30 that much socialization is going to happen outside. But at minus 10, it does, and it can do. And you can create places that actually improve that microclimate, so you can have more activities. And the health benefits of that are, we don't know exactly what the health benefits are, but we can see that there is a positive relationship between those two things. And also, spin-off issues of sustainability, lack of using the car, etc., etc. So the sort of key messages that I've found from my experience of being in the north is that when we started doing our planning of places and towns and cities and high streets and so on and so forth, often we've taken a lot of commercial drivers, a lot of planning policy drivers, a lot of this and a lot of that and a lot of precedent. But we haven't just actually thought about what are the things that can make this place work successfully in terms of the climate. That's one thing that's come out from my work. The other thing is that what is it that really makes places attractive? And it's not just about the architecture or the beauty of a place, but it's about all the amenities and services and opportunities it provides. But I also think that there is a big opportunity for urban design or shaping our town centres to be more successful for people, is actually helping out and sort of underpinning a sort of new individual-led approach to some forms of health management, whereby being healthier, using the outdoor spaces more and more, we're less likely to be we're less likely to be sort of getting ill health, we'll be fitter, more active, we'll be doing things. So how we can start to think about those in terms of our towns and cities and town centres, I think is critical. And on that note, I'm going to stop because I think that's out of time.